So welcome to the Okta Workflows webinar. Today we are going to discuss about Okta Workflow platform, why it is needed and how it can help us in our identity and access management journey. So this is targeted towards the beginner who do not have much hands on Okta Workflows. And through this webinar, we are going to tell you the capabilities which is associated with Okta Workflows and its no-code platform. Before that, a little bit intro about Askmeidentity. So we are a consulting, staffing, and training organization. We provide services on cybersecurity platforms like Okta, Ping, ForgeRock, SailPoint, CyberArk, DevOps, Azure Cloud, AWS Cloud, and other soft-related activities. We also provide consulting and staffing services. In this webinar, we are going to discuss about Okta Workflows platform. We will be understanding system logs and events in Okta, and we'll see the different components of Okta workflow like triggers and actions. And then at last, we will be creating a simple Okta workflow to demonstrate how workflow can be leveraged for our identity automation. So we would be getting to know the platform in general. We'll look into the capabilities of Okta workflow and how it can integrate with different applications and connect with different applications like Splunk, ServiceNow, Gmail, Office 365, and so on. So introducing Okta Workflows platform. Okta Workflow is an event-driven.
Sorry to interrupt, Sumit. Your voice is a bit low right now.
Kenya is here.
Yeah, Abhishek.
Yeah, Sumit, sir, your voice is a bit low.
Okta Workflows as a platform, it's a no-code platform from where we can create business automation. It's an event-driven automation and business flow tool. So we can take any event which occurs within Okta and we can create a business automation out of that. For example, when a new user is created in Okta, whether it's an employee, contractor, customer, we can place several requests on behalf of that user. So usually when somebody joins an organization, we need to provide them a laptop, access to certain applications, add them to certain security groups so they can perform their job functions. Instead of manually doing this through an administrator, we can use Okta Workflows to do it for ourselves. So we can connect our Okta Workflows with ServiceNow, which is a ticketing tool. And as soon as a user is created based on the job title and the manager relationship, it can create tickets in the ServiceNow platforms. And once the tickets are closed, it can also update the same in Okta. So this is the benefit of using Okta Workflows because it's highly integrated with Okta and any application which connects with Okta. And if you look into the OIN, there are 7,000 plus applications which supports Okta Workflows and have connectivity with Okta. Other alternatives of Okta Workflows are Better Cloud, Workato, Microsoft Power Automate. These are also no-code platform. But the benefit of using Okta Workflows is that Okta Workflows is integrated with Okta. So it can not just only read the events which is happening in Okta, but it can also use the features like SSO, SCIM, and any other connected applications with Okta. So it can leverage multiple benefits based on an identity automation, while other tools are good for general automation. So in this webinar, we are going to see different flow component, how we can trigger a flow, if a flow needs to be scheduled, uh, helper flows and APIs. We are also going to look at connections. What are the different types of connections we can establish in Okta workflows, tables, and how we can check the usage statistics of our Okta workflows in an organization. So we'll go towards Okta Workflow as a platform, and we'll look at the different components in Okta. So Okta workflow can be accessed through the admin console. So in order to access Okta workflow, you should be a super administrator.
once you're super administrator and added to the Okta workflow application, you would be able to access Okta workflows. The user should be a part of this Okta workflows application in order to access. Then Okta workflow console can be launched from workflows console, and we would go to the home page of Okta workflows where we can see different instructions on how we can use Okta workflows. Also, we can use one of the templates. So templates are pre-created workflows as an example, and we can use this template and modify uh, and create our own business requirement, such as, for example, if we need to identify all inactive Okta users, then instead of writing our own business logic, we can use this template. So it will create a flow within our Okta workflows, and it will be able to run and identify all inactive Okta users in our tenant. And if we see, it will be creating one connector called Okta to execute Okta's API, and it will be creating one main flow, which will be triggered based on a schedule, and one helper flow to assist this main flow, and one table to store the inactive users. The other components of Okta workflows is flows itself. So flows are the business logic. Earlier, when Okta workflows or there were no platforms like this, we used to write our own script or program, and we used to execute those scripts leveraging Okta API. Now, instead of writing the custom script, we can use Okta Workflows as a platform, and we do not need to write code. It's a drag and drop, no code editor. So we can build our logic very succinctly here in Okta Workflows. Okta Workflows organizes different flows and business automation in folder. So we can also create different folders. For example, I have created demo one and skin provisioning as a folder. In demo one, if you see, we have one flow. This is a flow. And if we look at this flow, we can see different cards. So these each segment is called as a card, and they only perform a specific function. For example, this is a read user card. So it will be able to read the profile of the user from Okta based on a given input. For example, this is a text segment card. So it will be able to make substring from a given string based on the start and end position. Likewise, there are multiple programming function card as well as app connectivity card, which we can use in order to create our business logic. Other than flows, if we go back, we can also create a table in order to store certain values. So we need to store values like API token, or if we need to store users, we can create a table and we can read and write from table. We can also create connections. So if we want to leverage different applications connected with Okta workflows, then we can create a connection, and then we will be able to use the actions associated with that connection. For example, I have connected Gmail, so I can read email from a mailbox. I can send an email to different users and so on using Gmail. There are multiple applications and their connectivity available with Okta. These are the applications which Okta supports out of the box. We can also use other applications which is not listed here if they have an API connector. So even if Okta Workflows has not done an out-of-box integration with those applications, we can still use it by making use of API calls. And these are some example applications which can be used with Okta Workflows natively. So first, we need to create a connection with Okta, which I have already created. For this course, I'll create one once again. So I have to look for Okta here in this list. And we can give it a name like Okta new. And we need to provide our Okta domain. For us, it is trial-6205492.okta.com. And we need to then provide the client ID and secret. In order to get the client ID and secret, if we go to our applications, and we would find an app called Okta Workflows OAuth, and this is the client ID of that application. And we can also copy the client secret from the sign on tab of this application. and we can provide the client secret here, and this will then create a connection with Okta Core platform and Okta Workflows. And this connection will be used to execute any Okta API like read user or to identify an event from Okta or to make any changes with Okta. Again, as discussed, only super administrators can add this connection because only super administrators can access Okta Workflows. So the user should be super administrator. Here I am already super administrator, so I am able to do that. In case if your Okta Workflows connection expires or token expires and it is no longer working, you can also click on reauthorize, which will regenerate an Okta token, and it will be able to then again use your business logic. All right, now we can go ahead and we can start creating a flow, and we can understand how flows works in Okta Workflow. So I will go to my default folder, or I can create a new folder called Okta Webinar. And in Okta Webinar, I can create a new flow. Once I create a new flow, I have to specify an event. Event signifies when will this workflow trigger or run. Now, workflow can be triggered based on an action which has been performed in Okta, like a user login, user changes password, or a user created, deactivated. Or we can also schedule this when we don't have a predefined event, but we want to run this flow every day on a specific time. Let's say every day we want to run a report to check the users whose password is about to expire in 15 days and then send them an email that the password is about to expire. Then we can run this on schedule. So when you click on add event, we have a different app from which we can read an event. Also, we can read an event from Okta. Natively, most of the time when you create an Okta workflow, you would be reading the event from Okta itself. So Okta's events are going to trigger the Okta workflow. If not, then you can also create a scheduled flow, which will run on a specific date time. We can also create a helper flow, which will not run on its own, but it has to be triggered from a main flow. So let's say when a user joins an organization, so user is created, which will trigger the main flow. Now within main flow, we can pass some kind of variable or some kind of functionality to the helper flow to do some small functions and then return back. So it's similar to the functions in programming language. In this example, we are going to use Okta event. So we'll select Okta, and we are going to read on an event user created. So we are going to trigger this workflow whenever a user is created in Okta. So we will select user created as an event. And this gives us information about that log. So it gives us date and time, message that user has been created, which we see in system log as well. It is going to provide us an event ID, event type, time, version. Then it is going to provide us information about the administrator or actor who performed this event, who created this Okta user account. And this is going to provide us information about the Okta user who is created by himself. And this is the event details, event ID, and event data. Now we can make use of these information and we can create a business logic. So what we are going to do is in this event, we can see about the user who is getting created. We are getting the ID of the username, display name, and type. In this workflow webinar, we are going to create a custom attribute in Okta profile called user ID, and we are going to generate a unique user ID for each user which is created in our Okta tenant. So let's go ahead and create a custom attribute first. So in order to create a custom attribute, we go to directory profile editor. And in the profile editor, we have a default profile called user. In default profile, we are creating a string attribute called user ID, or we can also say unique user ID. So this is not the username, but this is a user ID, a grid for our users to uniquely identify themselves, similar to SAM account name in AD. So we are going to populate this value. And the formula which we are going to use to create this unique value would be, we are going to take the first 3 characters of their first name and 3 characters of their last name, and we will append it with number 1 or any number in order to generate this unique ID. And I am going to save this as a string attribute. So now this is part of unique user ID as a user profile. And by default, if we look at any of the user, we should see this is currently empty, as it is not a required attribute. So this is currently empty. Now we can design our business logic here in the workflows. So now once the workflow is triggered, whenever a user is created, we want to perform some logic to create that unique user ID. We need to read user's first name and last name because we want to take the 3 characters from first and last name. So what we would like to do next is we would create an app action. And the action which we are going to perform is to read the user profile from Okta. So Okta itself is considered as an application. So we have to create, add an app action. And we have to look for Okta as an application. And in this list of actions which we can perform in Okta, we are going to read user. So if you search for read, you can get read user. And here we need to provide some input based on which it will try to find that user. And then we need to provide the attributes which we want to retrieve from Okta profile. So we are going to provide a login ID or a user ID to find the user. And then we want to retrieve user's first name and last name. So we will uncheck all of these other attributes. And we are going to select first name and last name. And in order to pass a user ID, this will be a dynamic value. It will based on the event. So if user A is created, it will be user's A's ID. If next day user XYZ is created, it will be their ID. So we'll not specify any static value here. Rather, what we will do is we will tell this card of Okta read user to take the value from the log. And this is the log, right? So we will be taking the ID of the user from the log. So we'll connect the ID from the Okta user from Okta user created log or event to the read user. So every time whenever a new user is created, this value will point to that specific user ID and it will be passed to this card to read the user profile. And it will read first name and last name and provide those values. Now, next, what we want to do is we want to substring the first name and last name. That means we only want 3 characters from the beginning of the first name and 3 characters of the last name. For that, we are going to use a string function called text segment, or which is also called a substring in programming languages. And since this is not associated with any app, it's a specific programming concept, we are going to click on add function. So anytime we need to use programming functionalities, we would be adding a function. Anytime we need to execute any app action associated with Okta apps, we can click on add app action. So here we are going to look for text, and in the text, we are going to search for text segment. So text segment will take a text as an input and a starting position and ending position, and it will give us the segment or substring. So we will start with first name. So we are providing first name as an input, and we want the first 3 characters. So the starting position is 0. 0 indicates the first position, and likewise, we want to go till the third position. So we want to have the first character, second character, and third character. So it will be 0, 1, and 2. So we want 0, 1, and 2 characters to be given to us as an output of this card. So we will provide the end before as 3. So it says start from 0, but end before 3. So that means it will go from 0 till 2. 0, 1, and 2 would be covered. And as soon as it reaches 3, this segment will stop and it will provide us a substring. Similarly, we can also do the same thing for the last name. But before I do that, I would like to rename this variable. So instead of saying segment, we can say first name characters. So it's easy for us to understand what this value is. And now I can add one more text segment card for the last name. So now I will provide last name as input. Similarly, starting position at 0 and end before 3. And we can rename this as last name characters. Now we also want to add some random digit. So we are going to again click on add function. And here we have a unique UID generator. So we can click on unique ID and this will generate a unique ID for us. Now we want to combine these three values together. So we want to combine the first name, last name, and this unique ID together. So we get one value. So let's say if my name is Sumit Kumar, then it will take the first three characters from the first name, which is SUM, and it will take the last name, three characters, which will be KUM, and then it will generate some random ID, and it will be adding SUM, KUM, and this ID together as a unique user ID. So now in order to combine these together, it is called as concatenation. We need to add these together. So what we can do is either we can use the string concatenate option and we can add all those together. So we can like pass the first name, last name, and this unique ID. This is a clean way of adding these strings together. The other way, and in this compose card, we can drag and drop the first name and last name and unique ID, which will help us like generate kind of value. So this operation of compose card and this text concatenate will give us the same output, but this compose card is not a cleaner approach and it is not recommended. So I will discard this and we are going to use this method. And instead of calling it as an output, I can rename it to unique user ID. So we know what this is. We should always name our variables so that we can understand from it by looking at it without debugging this flow. So now that we have got our unique user ID created, we have to check if there already exists a user in Okta with this unique user ID. If a user is already existing in Okta with this unique user ID, we should not be using that unique user ID. If user does not exist in Okta with this unique user ID, then we can update this new user with the unique user ID we have generated. So again, we are going to use a branching feature called if else. So we'll click on add function and we can select if else and we have to compare a value. So we are going to before we do that, if else, sorry, we have to first find out if a user exists with this unique user ID or not. So we are going to execute an Okta API call in order to search a user with this user unique ID. So we will click on add app action and we are going to select Okta as an application and we are going to look for find user. And even if a single user exists with this unique user ID, we should not use this unique user ID and we should either generate a new unique user ID or let some administrator know about it. So for us, we can select first matching record. So this basically says to find all the users matching with this unique user ID. For us, even if one single user is found, that is ample for us to take a decision that we don't want to use this unique user ID. So we'll select first matching record and click on save. And now it will ask us the different attributes which we want to retrieve about this user. As of now, we just wanted to know if there is a user in Okta with this unique user ID. So just the ID value is enough for our workflow. So we will not select any other attribute other than the ID. So once this list is populated here, we have to deselect all those other fields. Any questions so far from anyone? Okay, so we just want to pass a query, which is our unique user ID, and we want to retrieve the ID as a result. So we will be providing a query. So we first need to compose a query. So we will be adding another card, compose card here, and we have to provide a query, which is search equals to profile dot the attribute which we created, and the attribute is unique user ID. Equals to, so those who know Okta and have worked with Okta API before, they should be familiar with this syntax of searching a user using attribute value. So I am trying to search a user whose unique user ID matches this specific value. So this is going to be my query, and I can rename this as search query. Again, this name can be given anything. It is just a syntactical name which I'm providing so I can understand later on if I just look at this variable. So if a user exists with this user ID, it will return the ID of the user. Otherwise, it will return null. So if the result is a null, then we know that there is no user with this unique user ID, and we can use this ID and update this user which we got in the log. So now what we can do is we can use the if else, and we can say if this ID equal to null, then we want to update the user, else we want to do something else. So here, when this ID is equals to null, that means there is no user with this user unique ID. We want to update the user with this unique ID which we created. So we want to perform an update user function in Okta. So we'll be selecting Okta as an application. And here in the list of actions, we would like to select update user. Now update, again, if you have worked with Okta API, update can be either partial or strict. So in a strict update, if we do not provide the value of a specific attribute, then that attribute will be wiped out. So that will be set as blank in Okta profile. We don't want to do that. We only want to update the unique user ID with this value, and all other attributes will remain as it is in Okta universal directory. So we would be selecting partial update, and we'll click on save. Now we need to specify the list of attributes which we want to update for this user. So we have to select the attribute again, similar to how we have done for previous Okta cards. And if there is already a user existing with this unique user ID, we have two options. Either we can create a new unique user ID and we can rerun this entire flow of searching if there is a user existing and then updating the user, or for this webinar, we would just send an email to an administrator stating that a user already exists with this user unique ID, so they can take some custom action. And I already have Gmail as an email provider associated with my Okta workflows. So I will be using that. So I can select here, send email from my Gmail card. And I can then send an email to administrator to notify that this flow has failed and they can take some manual action. So I can send an email to myself. So it will be sent to sumit@askmeidentity.com, and from the same email for this example. And we can put the subject that workflow failed, and we can then say workflow failed in the body as well. So this email will be sent to this user. in case if there is a user with this unique user ID. Here we need to provide the attribute which we want to update, and we need to select the attribute from our list of attributes. So we want to select a unique user ID which we are going to update, and this is an output. Once updated, what are the values it will return? I only want to see the unique user ID we can return, so we can select that specific value instead of selecting others. So we can select unique user ID and click on save. So now we have to provide which user has to be updated. Again, we are going to take the value of that user from the ID here, which we get from the log. So we can drag and drop this ID to this field, and the unique user ID which we created, which is this one. And now our flow is complete. So we have completed our workflow, which will get triggered whenever user is created, and it will read the profile of the user, read the first and last name, and substring the first and last name to the 3 characters from the beginning. And then it will generate a random unique ID, and it will combine the first name, last name, and the unique ID together as one string. And if user does not exist with that string, it will update the user. And now we can save this and provide a name for our workflow. I can say unique user ID. And we can also enable the box which says save all data that passes through the workflow. So it can have a flow history. So we would be able to check when was a flow run, what was the data passed, and if there is a failure, it is very helpful for us to troubleshoot. We can now click on save, and this workflow will be saved. But currently this workflow is not active. So we have to activate this workflow by selecting this checkbox, which is flow is off. Then it will turn this flow as on flow. And now if we go to the folder of the webinar, we can see this workflow as an active. And in history, we can see it has never ran. And this was the date and time when it was updated. So now if we go ahead and create a user in people. So if we create an Okta webinar user, and if we click on save, so since this user is now created, it will create a system log in our Okta event. So a system log should have been created. Let me refresh this. Create Okta users, Okta webinar test. The system log was created. This is going to trigger our Okta workflow. So if we go back to our Okta workflow and refresh this, this is showing us never ran, but let's check the flow history. This flow is on. Yeah. Sometimes there can be a delay, so we can just give it a few seconds and see if it is running. Okay, let's test our flow by manually running it to see if it is running successfully or not. So we can get the ID of that user, which we created. So this is the user ID, and we can pass that manually ourselves just for the test. So we can say ID of this user, and we can click on run test. So this is going to give us a preview of the workflows and the different actions performed on this card. So if we see from the left, we triggered this user created event manually. ourselves by providing the user ID. This user ID was passed to the read user profile card, from where it created an API action to read the first and last name. After getting the first name, it was able to get the 3 characters from the first name and 3 characters from the last name. And it also generated a unique user ID. Then it combined the first name, 3 characters, last name, 3 characters, and this ID. And it was able to create a unique user string. It then tried to create the search string, which will be used by this find user card. And since there is no user existing with this unique user ID, it was not able to find a user. And as per our logic, if there is no user existing with this unique user ID, a user should be updated with this ID. If user exists, then an email should be sent. So if you can see, the check mark was done on this box. So it entered into the true block and it did not enter into the false block. So if we look at this user now, this user should have the unique user ID generated. So user has this unique user ID generated and updated in the profile. But that should have also run automatically as well. So let's try creating one more user and validate that. Again, now it shows twice. So I think there are some delays. It's showing this flow ran twice, but it ran only once. So I will create one more user for our test. And this time I can say submit workflow test. I can save this user. Now that this user is created, let's see the execution history if it has been triggered or not. So the history has increased. So we can go to our execution history and we can see there is a success. And we can see user was submit workflow test. So it got the first 3 characters from the first name, last name, and it was able to set the unique user IDs. Now, if we go and check this user, which we created as submit workflow test, we should be able to see the unique user ID in the profile. So this is the benefit of using Okta Workflows. This was a very simple demonstration of how to use Okta Workflows capabilities. Now there are multiple other functionalities associated with Okta Workflows, and we have published a self-learning course on our website, training.askmeidentity.com as well, through which you can enroll and you can learn more about Okta Workflows. This is a complete for that webinar today. Abhishek can take over. Thank you.